Blazon, HP, Heat Software, Interlink, and Manage Engine. And they also supported and actually added value in terms of contributing ideas to the questionnaire and to this, some of the outcomes, therefore, of the research. Quick look at methodology and a little bit of the analysis around it. So we had 270 respondents. The goal was to get 150 in North America and 100 in Europe. And we did get a few in South America and Asia as well. The goal was to also make sure that everybody had some involvement in ITSM. But we did want to look at that without too narrow a spectrum. So we did include, and we did get small amounts, but sufficient to kind of look at them as persona, some operations and development teams. So we got a significant number of executives, as you'll see. And geographically, in terms of the research, we did look at, differences between North America and Europe. There weren't too many striking differences. I would say North America, though, as a trend, the respondents were a little more committed to some of the newer functions, especially integrated ops and DevOps and user experience management. They tended to view a manager of managers, and I'll touch on our question there, as something that would be good. They might look that way if they had advanced analytics and automation. And they had more likely to have a fast track between IT service management and Agile. We'll get to that later. Europe was a little more likely to prefer ease of deployment and administration if they would opted for a manager of managers. And also, this is shown up on a number of research projects, more interested in customer sat surveys and social media. So those are a little bit of the geographical differences. So we had a nice mix of sizes. We didn't want to look at really small environments just because it's so different. We started at 500 and above. We got significant large enterprise, as you can see, but pretty good spread across different sizes. And how did those stack up? So as may be surprising, but is very consistent with other data, and the very large enterprises were not what I would call the most progressive. They were least likely to be slated for growth, least likely to embrace big data analytics or advanced analytics, and we'll look again more closely at that as something that was shared with IT service management. They saw it more in the province of operations only. And actually least likely to federate their CMS. Smaller enterprises were more focused on user experience management analytics, and that's a high growth area for ITSM. More likely to see a shared ITSM operations value in big data and analytics. More likely with the mid-tier to federate CMS, and most likely to offer mobile access to corporate apps for the end user. The mid-tier, interestingly enough, most likely to be slated for growth, and something that most of you probably wouldn't expect. They were the most likely of all the groups to own some level of CMDB or CMS-related investment. And small companies were, like big companies, generally not so progressive, least likely to integrate enterprise services in the broader spectrum. And we'll look at all that, all those kinds of insights in more detail as we go. We did get a significant executive presence, as you can see, 50%. We did not set a quota, so this was simply how they came in, and including 21% CIO and CTO. So the executive perspective is very heavily weighed here. The average revenue was in keeping with the size, IT budget in keeping with the size, and definitely a very consistent pattern. 35% of budgets grew more than 10% for IT, and that is in line in general with what we see across, or at least what I'm seeing in most of my research. The lead verticals were finance, healthcare, manufacturing, and retail in that order. And so I would say what I'm seeing here that's distinctive for our research is healthcare is moving up the ladder as a high growth vertical, for many areas. So how are these respondents different by role? I always believe you get a different answer depending on who you ask. It can be in the same company. It will be a different answer. Generally, CIOs are a little more bullish. In general, more likely to prioritize very cross-domain strategic initiatives like CMDB. They, in this case, were more focused on ITSM and Agile coming together. Service desk managers were very focused on user experience, and that's a main theme for this research as well. Those in operations were very interested in a number of areas, but a lot of them naturally linked with operations to service desk integrations, not just trouble ticketing, but more in the order of analytics, more in the order of shared workflows, et cetera. And development was more likely to look for, from an ITSM perspective, better project management and better feedback loops on usage, application requirements, and application quality. So here you can see who drives and who's the overall ITSM initiative, executive suite leads and operations overall. And this is also consistent with other research we've done a couple of years ago. It is clearly not an isolated team that operates in a vacuum, nor should it be. And if that's your situation, then you know, I would view that as a challenge. 50%, well, actually 49% of the total people who tried to take this survey were slated for growth. We had set a quota because we wanted to look at what growth-related ITSM teams were to 50%. The actual number was just 1 percentage point different. 35% remained the same, and 15% were reducing their size, I guess, simplest way to say it. The top reasons for growth, and I'll give you some percentage points here. Naturally, if a company is slated for growth, ITSM rides with it, and that was 62% checked that. And you could check multiple till you get high percentages. Another one close to that in number was ITSM teams were assuming more responsibility across different lines of business and reaching out that way. Another leading idea was expanding their ITIL or IT infrastructure library practice scope, needing to expand in terms of process support there. And cloud came in fourth as a stimulant for ITSM growth. In terms of reasons for decline, and you can see it's a small number, we're actually declining in size. We did not ask if your company was declining in size, and I would have changed that and asked that if I'd known. In retrospect, so given that, the top three were being outsourced in part. The line of business, and this is sort of a flip side, line of business is taking over more ownership of what we do. And cloud, here, instead of being a stimulant, is eroding the ITSM presence. And so once again, you get a little bit of a feel for this sort of two-track set of attributes to ITSM. So on a different front, when we looked at enterprise and IT service desk requirements, huge growth area in combining those in different ways. Only 11%, and I was a little surprised, to be honest, to see so low, had no plans to consolidate IT and non-IT customer service. And that could be to external customers of the product, or it could be internal lines of business. And this was a jump from just 2 years ago when it was 25%. So pretty significant there. Some functional thoughts here in terms of priorities. Hopefully the thoughts will be functional as well. Improved end user experience and operations to service desk integrations really do dominate. And this is very similar, by the way, in this case, a very similar pattern to what we had 2 years ago. In this case, if you look down at 20% down toward the bottom, you'll see improved user experience internal to line of business. A fifth in ranking was external, And needless to say, user experience for external customers, supply chain, consumers, whatever, is going to vary based on vertical. So in some that would be much higher than others based on the vertical. And then integrations for with operations for incident and problem management, and then integration with operations for change management and configuration management. And I apologize, you actually can't read all that detail on this sign here. So those were the two. Next in sequence. And then cloud is a big driver. The cloud is growing up in the rankings as a catalyst for change in ITSM, mostly for the good, actually, but not always. Some of the other functional priorities that you can see here improved service management and improved automation. They were actually tied in our data. And for those of you who think the CMDB and CMS or ADDM are going away, the answer seems to be not at all. They're growing, and we just did a book called CMDB Systems Making Change Work in the Age of Cloud and Agile. And that certainly was based on a lot of deployment conversations last year. It's a growth area, but the technologies are changing, becoming much more dynamic and adaptive, and we'll look at that a little bit more as we go. Third was service catalog for self-service and cloud, and cross-domain asset. And cross-domain can mean a lot of things, right? It doesn't just mean systems and network, storage, whatever. It might even mean telecom expenses or service provider management for cloud. There's quite a dimension to that. Mobile support for IT stakeholders. 69% thought that big data analytics for IT should be either shared with operations or was centric to IT. The top analytic priorities, by the way, what did they want? Incident and problem management was number one, to be shared with operations probably. Also analytics for IT governance in terms of efficiencies and effectiveness. That might be more centric to IT service management. Change management, also a big priority, and user experience and visibility into user experience problems. Right now, the market is framed so that half the world sees UEM in terms of APM or application performance. The other half sees it through the service desk. And so far, those two halves of the brain are not united. They live in completely separate worlds, thanks to many of those who make up market definitions, but IT seems to realize they need to come together. I should add that only 22% saw analytics as in spite of the name IT operations analytics, which is unfortunate, primarily the purview of operations. That was only 22%. So in terms of CMDB, we mentioned there was a high percentage of ownership, 57%, 23% had plans to purchase. And that was an average of multiple use cases, 3 per respondent. I would call your attention to just one thing on this chart down below. Look at that 47%. The number one prioritized use case in 2015 for a CMDB deployment is performance-related service impact. A, that speaks of the need to integrate with operations. B, it speaks of a much more dynamic approach to understanding impacts and service impacts than we've had in the past. And the technologies are changing and moving in that direction. So that's good news. And of course, cloud is a big stimulant for that in both cases, both for adoption and also for making pressures on more dynamic discovery, et cetera. In terms of other perspectives on change, 71% have purchased or have plans to purchase application discovery and dependency mapping. And the dominant drivers were move to cloud, asset management, and data center consolidation. I was a little surprised to see the performance management didn't stand out because often it's ADDM that unifies the CMS with the more performance in real time versus the CMDB. But I realized when we asked the question, we broke it up in 2 parts, infrastructure performance and application performance. If you added those together, they would have been tied for first with the move to cloud. So that helped to explain that deficit. And of these, 59% have a plan to link ADDM to their CMDBs. For automation, because visibility and insight enable better automation. I know there are a lot of vendors trying to sell automation as an end in itself, but some of them will be automating train wrecks. So the top priorities for IT process automation, or what some people would like to call runbook, systems configuration, workflow between service desk and ops, that reinforces the ops to service desk handshake, storage and network config, and automation for lifecycle asset management, which is actually increasingly a complex discussion. 66% of our respondents had a service catalog, pretty much an exactly 2/3 ratio here. And their priorities were, as you can see here, the top two were internal, really, to IT provisioning and project management for professional services, followed by support for cloud and non-cloud delivered applications. Getting applications out there, and cloud is key. So as you go through, then support for endpoint and laptop, and user access to transactional applications, also key. So to what degree is our ITSM community embracing cloud? Much more aggressively than just a couple of years ago. 88% are looking to publish cloud-related services and catalogs, and the top four, even though you see 3 bullets, are kind of there. So the top 2 internal, and the top bottom public cloud. And not surprisingly, larger companies tend to gravitate to internal cloud more, and smaller toward external cloud. When it came to bringing the enterprise and IT together in terms of catalog services, and there's a lot more than just catalog. There's process and workflow and all kinds of growth areas for enterprise support, but we targeted catalog here. Vendor and contract management, key for that lifecycle asset value. Purchasing, also. Facilities is very often the number one you see on a checklist. As insights, especially with related to the growth in mobile that we'll look at, you start to be able to access data and see data and get resources about data involving facilities capabilities and pulling them into the catalog. Operations for enterprise operations, and sales, which actually, there are a number of other choices, but I was a little surprised and happy to see sales that high on the list. Moving on to mobile and endpoint. Really good to have mobile support for service desk professionals. But what's interesting to me is if you look at this list, well, the top one is improved responsiveness to IT consumers. And we also looked at mobile support for consumers, which was key, so that you could combine them, you rub 2 sticks together and got a fire, a good fire, but clearly helped the efficiencies there. And of course then, number 2 was better efficiencies, and that's very important for the executive community. Then what's really interesting to me, 36%, 35% on the top 2 bars, improved collaboration between service desk and ops, 1 percentage point higher than improved collaboration among service desk professionals. I guess sort of makes sense given the mobile nature of where ops might be, but I think that's telling in how this area is evolving. So 85% had mobile support in some form for end users across a fairly heterogeneous universe, like it or not. Again, it's that consumer-driven IT, kind of scary in a way, because look at all those form factors, but in reality, that's where the market's going and what ITSM needs to be all about. And 65% offered mobile access for end users for corporate apps. 50% allowed end users to make their service requests via mobile. And of those, there's a lot of other data we looked at. I won't go into here on mobile. In general, though, if you made linkage between the ITSM service desk and the end user, and on mobile, 78% saw that meaningful or dramatic improvement in service delivery. In terms of self-service, the top bullets there are, as they came in, listed in rank order: automation for end user access to services, self-service enabled knowledge management, so users could get insight into what's going on with their problems, perhaps, automation for resolving end user issues, self-service via a service catalog, and just generally mobile access. Managing endpoints was another big theme for our research. This is a quick summary of some of the highlights. If you're managing lifecycle, what are your top 5 priorities? Capturing usage, license management, software distribution, operating system deployment, and patch management. And 58% wanted an integrated capability for managing endpoints across different form factors, mobile, non-mobile, et cetera. 82% wanted an integrated console for mobile and non-mobile. And that was especially popular with the executive group, as you can imagine. Cloud and Agile. So how is cloud impacting ITSM? And again, we have a kind of history here, and there's some pretty common themes that consistently crop up. Both, it's seen as a resource. If you look at the top 2 vertically, well, the top 1 in ranking and the top 2 vertically, a resource for expanding ITSM capabilities, and also a resource for reducing ITSM and other costs. Then you see 3 who are tied, really, for second place, the 28%ers, requiring higher levels of automation, pushing us to pay more attention to DevOps because cloud is stimulating the Agile movement. The choice of application options that cloud can provide is forcing IT to become more consumer-driven. I suppose we could spend a whole webinar on that one, 28%. And then the bottom 28%, making asset management harder because assets reside all over the world. Anyway, how do you optimize them? How do you know where they are even? So those are some of the highlights. I think it's significant that only 14% saw no impact from cloud. That's definitely a drop from the past. So when it came to functional priorities for cloud, what were they? Integrated ops, again, comes out. Support of incident and problem management, improved capabilities for runbook and process automation, more dynamic support for capturing interdependencies. That service modeling, analytics, governance all go together. 65% are integrating application release management with IT service management. That's up dramatically from 39% just 2 years ago. So for those of you who don't believe it's real, trust me, it's real, and it's also a significant sign of progress for ITSM, as we'll see. Up from the 65%, an additional 16%. It says have committee plans. Actually, my mistake, it should be committed. They may have a committee too, I don't know. But committed plans for ITSM and Agile. I should add that 53% are seeing a fast track, where they're using separate tools today by and large, but want to bring them together, at least with some overlap between the ITSM community, the development community, and ops. That's a high growth area that, as I watch it evolve, still tends to be pretty fragmented. I don't think too many people in the market have figured out that ITSM is a central player in Agile yet. So what does this look like when they bring all this together? The top 2 make sense. They're scheduling and workflow. That's probably not too shocking for anyone. Feedback loops comes in third for usage and need. Understanding the community out there. Who are you serving? What apps? Don't go ahead and just trust some business analyst. He probably has no clue in reality. I hate to say it. Most of them may not. Don't quote me on that. Get the data from the people who actually talk to and listen to and have a dialogue with the user community. Here are two that are really interesting next, 31% and 30%. Automation for configuration, and this is 30% near and dear to me, leveraging the CMS to support the development community. In doing the book, we talked to one deployment where a CMDB was purchased by development, pushed into ops and the service desk, but purchased by development using Scrum, not ITIL, to create a modeled way of understanding interdependencies. I'm going to move right to the end and see if we have, well, hopefully we'll have time for just a few questions. In terms of best practices, it's pretty eclectic out there. Many people are using different options. ITIL, if you gang them together, clearly, though, comes out at the top. That's not surprising. And to those who are using ITIL, 71% view it as very important or critical. So it's still a major player and possibly a growing player as it evolves. Then we asked, and I'll admit this is a very subjective question, so we get very subjective answers. How successful were you? And we asked the question so we can do comparisons. You'll see, however, only 16% scored themselves as extremely successful, and only 11% and 1% were either somewhat or largely unsuccessful. So we took those extreme groups, right, to compare and contrast. And what's interesting to me as I do research is while those actual percentages may probably not be too accurate, depending on what one defines as extremely successful, the actual relationships between the two extremes is usually very telling. So what was the extremely successful versus the low end? They were 4 times more likely to have integrated IT and non-IT capabilities in their service desk. They were twice as likely to have a CMDB or CMS investment. They were nearly 8 times more likely to have ADDM deployed or in plan, more likely to support cloud and service catalogs, twice as likely to be leveraging mobile, nearly 4 times to have a fast track and understand that that was kind of the present mantra, I guess, 20 times more likely to view integrated ITSM and Agile as transformative. So do I think that's an absolute statistic? Probably not. It's just how the data came out. I would just say it has an exclamation point to it. And more than twice as likely to be slated for growth. So I just have one concluding slide, so we should have just a few minutes for questions, even though we were late. Getting back to what I said at the beginning, I think that the data cries out that there are 2 kinds of groups in the service desk and ITSM arena. At a high level, I'm sure you could argue there are many more, but at the highest level, there's clearly a progressive ITSM and a non-progressive ITSM. And the progressive ITSM is a growth area. It transcends the service desk. It embraces operations in development and the consumer public very proactively. And so it attributes here integrated operations, workflows, and analytics and user experience, integrated DevOps and workflows, feedback loops and service modeling, attention to change management, CMDB, CMS, ADDM, evolving and getting more important, not less important, optimizing the cloud opportunity, mobile and unified endpoint management, support for enterprise services, and they are slated for growth. Unfortunately, the current market definitions work almost quite hostilely to understanding this still, and that can reinforce unfortunate organizational trends in IT. But I believe from this data that at least many in IT, or a growing number, are getting it, and especially the executive community. How do you understand these transformations? It's not just about technology, and it's not just about process. It's culture, technology, organization, process, and dialogue, I would say. I'm ready for any questions. We have 5 minutes, I think. So I'll turn it over to you, Raleigh.
Great, thank you, Dennis. And I, again, wanted to thank everyone for joining us. We did have technical issues, so I appreciate you attempting to get back in at a later time than usual. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the questions. I think we can still even keep this within the 45 minutes that we had allotted. The first question is, let me find it. what can IT do to be more agile to move the department forward? And it's also a two-part question. Also, will there be another requirement to enhance IT?
Wow, we could spend the next 20 minutes on that. We don't have it. So, but Raleigh, could you repeat just the first half of that question, how it was phrased?
Sure, no problem. The first part of the question is, what can IT do to be more agile to move the department forward?
Okay, all right. So many things come to mind, and I'll just mention a few, and if whoever asked that question wants to get back in touch and have a longer dialogue, that would be something we could probably welcome. I would say a couple of things. One is I'd stress the importance of user experience management. Why do I say that? Agile is all about speed, but Agile doesn't necessarily understand value, relevance, or impact on business outcomes. So where Agile really needs to start is with an understanding of who the consumer is and what they need. And once again, I do not believe that knowledge comes from internal business analysts by alone. They may be helpful, but the real data is increasingly out there. So start with user experience insights, understand how your services are being used, and build your priorities for Agile around those. The other is, as this data would suggest, invest in analytics, service modeling, and dialogue to support, and dialogue can sometimes just be sitting down with someone, no technology needed, a pad and a pen or a computer, and conversation between different stakeholders to build those relationships so that the workflow, the automation, the insights, and the analytics can be optimized. I could go on, but those are the two things that come out top of mind.
Great, thank you, Dennis. And let's take one additional question. What type of time frame should IT look at to move toward an agile environment?
What type? I'm sorry. What type of environment? Or
what's the time frame it would take for IT to move toward an agile environment?
Time frame. It's going to vary. It really is. I always like to say that I've never known a generic answer for IT because I've never known a generic IT professional. Hopefully that's a good thing, and I've never known a generic IT organization. So it's going to vary hugely. I think that the first step to do is to do a maturity assessment in terms of where you are and then how you can build forward. Honestly, for instance, this was a small mid-tier company where the development bought the CMDB and pushed it into ops. They were moving toward Agile very quickly, but it was a development-driven effort in a fairly small IT organization. In a large enterprise with all victims and line of business communities, it's going to be an evolving story that grows over multiple years, most likely, but starts to show benefits within hopefully a few months. So that's my quick answer.
Great, thank you, Dennis. And I wanted to thank our audience again for joining us.